So, Bob, I have some interesting short questions for you. It's really great when people send in long questions because sometimes questions need to be long. There's a lot of detail that needs to be given to us so we have a context. Sometimes people don't give enough context and we want more. But sometimes it's really great when people just send these really brief one-sentence questions because then it's easier for me to get through them all, you know?
How about this? I'll answer them and then you read them. Let's see how I do.
So, annual patron Soft Noodles, she says, "Hi, Bob. How about a little game? What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the following words? Love.
Sex. Oh, shit.
Trauma.
Donald Trump. Oh, my God. I can't believe I said that. Jesus, but it's true.
Childhood.
Oh, fuck.
Well, you said that.
There.
People.
Places.
Kirk.
Honda.
Bob.
I don't like this game.
Yeah. Colleen.
Oh.
Okay. Soft Noodles, the sender of the email.
Well, I see udon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Udon. Therapy.
Udon. Dog.
One thing you want.
Sex.
The experience. Your experience in this exact moment.
Oh, nervous and amused.
Oh, that was awesome, Soft Noodles. That was so great. Emma on, I think, YouTube commented something, and there were a couple other people were commenting. Maybe it was on Patreon, I'm not sure. But on our episode where we were talking about self-harm during therapy, remember there was that question of someone,
yeah.
I think on a video session was digging her fingernails into her hands, and she didn't notice. Right. And then when she, or maybe in office, and then she showed, she at the end of the session, she's like, "Oh, wow." She the emailer, the client said that the therapist seemed kind of freaked out about it or something. We don't know the exact interaction. We talked a lot about self-harm and non-suicidal self-injury. Right. And for those who are triggered by this, I don't think we're going to get back into it again. Well, maybe we will. Yeah. So if this is triggering for you, skip forward about 15 minutes, honestly. So we were talking about that, and I was asking you if it had ever happened to you, and you gave a story about how it would, because the clients that you worked with in the DBT class, the students that you worked with in the DBT class were there. Like 90% of them had a history of non-suicidal self-injury. Yes. If not all of them?
No, not all, and more in the research study than in my practice.
Okay. Yeah. And in your practice, maybe half or something, or
maybe half. Yeah, maybe half.
Okay. Yeah. And some of those would be actively trying to recover from that and not engage in that. And it was a topic of the course. You wouldn't get into the specificity with each student, but they would do that with their individual client. But in class, you would talk about emotional regulation, and you might talk about non-suicidal self-injury in a particular module. Yeah. And you would also talk about how the ground rules were such that they were not supposed to engage in it. They weren't supposed to talk about it directly, particularly if it was trying to glorify it or something.
Oh, yeah. No war stories for sure.
Right. Yeah. So there were these measures in place to protect people from being triggered, to not create an environment that encourages it. They're trying to recover. It's like trying to be sober from some addiction, and there need to be some ground rules about, because it would be not uncommon for someone pre-recovery from non-suicidal self-injury to talk about it in a very positive way. It's their little secret, wonderful getaway treat for themselves. That's not uncommon.
Yeah, no, very common. Yeah.
And to have that attitude and to support that attitude is to enable it, I'm guessing. And so for you as the instructor, you had these ground rules. And as we were talking about it, you told this story about someone who had done it in session. And then I think I asked, how did she feel about it afterwards? How did you react? This sort of thing. And you said the word that it was tacky. And in the moment, I listened back to it, and in the moment, I heard that word, and it was a little, I don't want to say shocked, but I had a reaction like, and so I tried to clarify that in the moment. And I think I said something like, oh, well, I can't remember what I said, but I was trying to soften it or something or contextualize it because it didn't seem like was being communicated in the way that I think it was actually being carried out in class, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So some people in the comment section were like, did he say tacky? And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a word Marsha Linehan uses.
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of what I learn, I just mimic. So that's one of the ways that she's talked about it. The idea, right? I think the comments are aimed at. It sounds like a judgmental way to refer to something somebody has a real struggle with, and I can see why that is. Yeah, and probably if I were thinking, I probably wouldn't use that word. And I probably don't use that word. I probably didn't use that word. Maybe I did. Did I ever use that with a client? Did I say I did? I might have.
Well, at the very least, the attitude that you had, it was indicative of that. The way you talked about the way you would talk about it in class. That it was, because it branched into another conversation that we had where I was like, well, for me, when people come into therapy with it, I, in summary, just treat it like anything else. And I would say, well, how do you want to talk about it? Do you want to work on it? I'm certainly not going to judge you for it.
Right.
Or they had engaged in it recently. I just had a very non-judgmental, open conversation. And even if they're in the middle of still glorifying it, I'm not going to try to change that immediately because that would be not wise. So I would just say, well, here's my thoughts on it, and let me know if you want to work on it. So it would be the same as if someone said they were using heroin or they were engaging in relationships that I thought weren't helpful in their life. I'm not going to judge them or tell them they can't or give them the impression that somehow I am secretly wanting them to even really necessarily change that. I'll tell them the truth. I'll just be like, I don't think this is helpful for you, but there's a lot of paths in life and we can work on whatever you want to work on. Whereas with you were saying even in individual therapy, you would have a more pointed approach of this needs to stop. I'm not going to entertain the idea that it's okay for you to continue to engage in non-suicidal self-injury. Something like that, right?
Yeah. I could see why it could land that way. Sometimes, we do have a different take on this. I don't do this kind of work anymore, but when I did, my attitude was it actually does have to stop because there's a risk to premature death. You increase the likelihood of premature death if you engage in self-harm or non-suicidal self-injury, and that's antithetical to goals. So I would, it's a dialectic because on the one hand, it has to stop. On the other hand, it's not just going to stop. So as I understand it, good treatment is aimed at turning the behavior, but not judging the person while you do it. And how long that takes is how long that takes. Mm-hmm. So my use of the word tacky is just a holdover from working with Marsha because it's the way that she would talk about it. Mm-hmm. But she was not judgmental about non-suicidal self-injury. She had the similar attitude that it's got a risk of premature death, so it's got to stop. It's also off-putting, like it's scary to people, and so people won't understand, and they will alienate. They'll isolate somebody. That's the bad thing that you're doing over there, so I don't want to be associated with the bad thing. The rule we had in the class is, if you do it, okay, right. It's, I think, now that I'm remembering, I think the way I talked about it is I had 2 experiences of students doing it in the class, and it sets up a dissonance for the other members because, presumably we're going up a particular mountain and that's going down. So, in a way you could say it's bad form. It's like, other folks here are trying not to do that. So when you do that here, that creates a problem for them, a potential problem. I have seen people mimic non-suicidal self-injury, and that was back when I was young and starting, and I didn't understand what that meant, and then somebody described some behavior in the class, and we didn't put a stop to it, and somebody else over the week mimicked it. Now, what I did most of my career, and what I would do if I were still doing that, is if somebody talks about it, I'll say, "Oh, you mean target behavior?" That's what they call it in DBT land. It's a target behavior, meaning it's a behavior that's targeted to be eliminated, which is not a judgmental way to put it, but it's a way to talk about it without it being a trigger. Mm-hmm. So instead of "Oh, you mean you did a target behavior?" which I have said many, many, many times. Somebody say, "Oh, yeah, right," because we make that agreement up front that we don't talk about the details of it.
Does target behavior always refer to non-suicide? Okay.
Could be alcohol like if somebody in class had a problem with alcohol, like they were alcoholic or something, then that would be considered a target behavior for them because it's a behavior that they're targeting in therapy to eliminate. So if they talk about drinking, I would say, "Oh, you mean target behavior." But if somebody else didn't have a problem with alcohol and they happen to be in the same class and they're talking about, they were out with their buddies and had a beer the other day, that's not a target behavior for them. So I wouldn't ask them not to talk about it because it's normative. Mm-hmm. But you can see where it's possible that somebody talking about non-abusive use of alcohol could be a trigger for somebody who's got alcohol addiction. It could be. And occasionally that's come up, and it's sort of tricky because in the way I don't want to do anything in the class that could lead somebody to relapse on the one hand. And on the other hand, you can't eliminate that from the world, like that potential trigger. So probably, as I understand DBT, what they would do in individual therapy is they would help that person get used to the fact that alcohol is everywhere and you still can't drink because it's, antithetical to your goals or whatever life, whatever. So, like I know a DBT therapist, really great therapist, and for a couple sessions, she met her client at a bar so that person could sit and not drink. She didn't drink and the client didn't drink, and kind of get used to, this is what it smells like in here. This is what it's like in here. Not that it's a good idea for people to be hanging out in bars. Maybe it's not, but if they're gonna, then that's a way to help not relapse.
Yeah, I mean, the way that it sounds, and I didn't realize this until maybe just now, is that DBT has a theme that is the main theme of a lot of drug and alcohol treatment programs. Not all, but they are often like this. It's similar to eating disorder treatment programs, where it's a different philosophy than the one that I have generally for therapy.
Yeah.
In that it's, I don't know the word for it, but it's a lot more directive.
Yeah.
And there are rules, and there's a vibe of, the only word that I have for it is judgment. You could use a different word like ground rules, but there's a culture around it, right? It's not just like, hey, we have this ground rule where that if you say you're in a drug and alcohol treatment program, we have this ground rule that if you relapse, and especially if we catch you on a drug test and you didn't tell us about it, then you will be terminated from this group. We have another group that you can go to, but for this group, we have a ground rule about that. And now, of course, DBT wouldn't do that.
No.
But it's a similar attitude of, you cannot do that here. And here is the rule.
That's probably just the way I'm talking about it. A good DBT therapist doesn't hold any judgment about this and recognizes that this behavior, it's a dialectic. On the one hand, it's going to happen. And on the other hand, it has to change. They're both true at the same time.
It has to change.
And it also is going to happen.
Right.
I don't know that you could frame it.
In the same way that relapses happen.
You could frame it as a failure, but I don't think any good therapist would frame it that way. But so like a good
one other phrase, it was tacky. It was
okay.
It was against what you should have done. It's against my expectations for you.
I feel protective of my students. So if somebody self-harms in the class, yeah, I'm going to be upset about it.
Totally. And I can imagine for the group cohesion, the protectiveness 100%.
And I don't have any judgment of the person that did it. Like, I remember liking her very much and wanting her to do well in class and, feeling an affinity for her. And not feeling a judgment of her whatsoever, as being, at the same time, being frank with her that, you cannot do that here because it's risky for the other members. Mm-hmm. And you are a member of this class, and I want to keep you.
Well, that's why, and I don't know, I might not remember this right, but that's why I was asking, so if in individual therapy, say outside of DBT, you just had a client that was talking about this, would you have a different attitude? And my memory, correct me if I'm wrong, was you said, well, not really. And I also want to emphasize what you're emphasizing is that I have no doubt that your students at no point, quote unquote, felt judged. I don't know that, but I don't think that that's likely given you. But given the DBT creed, I could imagine that some might, that's why I think when they heard the language, I think some people thought, wait, did he use the word tacky?
Yeah.
I don't know that, of course. Similarly, like when I worked with drug and alcohol folks side by side with them in the groups, there were moments where I thought, wow, like the drug and alcohol folks, there's a benefit to the way that they think, but it's not the way that I think. I'll give an example. Like there was a client of mine that was in the drug and alcohol group. She was suffering from opiate addiction and was tasked with, recovery, but she wasn't fully invested. Her parents, she was an adult, but her parents were the main ones who were really trying to get her to stop. She wasn't there necessarily 100% voluntarily, you know what I mean? Anyway. But, nice person and invested in stating that she wanted to quit.
Yeah.
And so in individual therapy with me, I knew the full her, and because therapy has a lot of different styles, my style is to be very open, and I work with them. I have my own thoughts, but I'm very far from any thought that I know what a person should do or thinking that there's only one way to health or something at a particular moment. So if, for example, she had told me that she had used, I would have said, oh, well, what do you want to do with that? Do you want to talk about it or not? And if she said, yeah, I don't really want to talk about it, I'd be like, okay. And I wouldn't give it a second thought because that's how I'm oriented. And I believe that's what the best service that I can provide people is not only to do that, but to literally have that mindset and to have a vibe of that mindset so that they don't think, well, he's secretly judging me, because that's just what I think is most helpful. So what?
I'm just imagining what I would do.
Yeah. Oh, what do you mean?
Well, if somebody said that to me, I bet $10 that there's a wave of shame coming for them. In which case, I would say, how's it feel?
Yeah.
And keep most of my attention focused on what is the experience that's happening in between us right now. Because most likely, there's a sense of shame that's come, and I would not ignore that.
Right.
Like that person's, me, I'm always thinking about The Matrix. I love The Matrix. Great film. Most people are in a matrix most of the time. So we're in our story about what is the world as opposed to what is the world. So someone lucky enough to land you as their therapist might not have a felt sense that you hold no judgment, and might have their sense of matrix, like this is how the world behaves towards me if I relapse, and it's going to shame me or it's going to attack me or whatever. And there's an anticipation of that, perhaps. So there's a lovely opportunity to really dig into that, to just go into and join with somebody in whatever their experience is, in this case, perhaps something like shame, and care about that.
I by your facial expression, I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that by completely ignoring it as at their request, I'd be ignoring something that was helpful.
Yes. Well, I don't think that you're saying that. I'm just extrapolating in my head.
Right. What you're saying is not contradictory to what I'm saying.
No, not even a little, no.
But at the same time, if you are oriented towards abstinence, and that's an important thing for you as a clinician, there's a lot of options in that moment. A client comes in and says, I relapsed, and I say, did you tell your drug and alcohol people about that? No, I don't want to tell them about that. Do you want to talk about that? No, not really. You sure? Yeah, I want to talk about other things. Then for me, there's literally thousands of things I could initiate from that point, or direct, or encourage, or something, emphasize. one of which is what you went to, which is an option for sure, and I might do that.
You might.
But if we always go in those directions, then it points to an inner drive for us as a clinician that there's priority, and that's fine. But for me, I reflect on that and I say, well, is that my priority? Is that the client's priority? Because, to be specific about this client, she had a ton of trauma, and the addiction was a symptom of that. And the addiction priority was far lower than the trauma and the family dynamics priority for me.
Yeah.
Now, if from that point forward, she just didn't want to talk about anything, again, that would be up to her. But I would at some point say, so, just throwing it out there, if you actually are here to work on things, I'm going to suggest, one of these things you should probably do. Anyway, but in the drug and alcohol group, when it was discovered that she had relapsed, they were very pointed about it. And the benefit to them is that, essentially when you're going through recovery, whether it's from cutting or from opiates or from gambling, there is a benefit to having a social consequence, if you will, to the target behavior.
Yeah.
That if you're alone and you're, standing in the bathroom about to engage in the target behavior,
right,
and you think, I'm going to have to tell my fellow group members and my teacher who I like and respect that I relapsed, and I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to disappoint them. Right. I don't want to have to talk about it. I don't want to have to admit that I did this. Right. I'm not, whatever. That has a healthy benefit to the individual.
Humans do function by accountability.
Right.
Yeah.
So when these individuals sign up for these programs, I would hope that they were told, this is our approach, and when you are consenting to this treatment, then this is what you're signing up for.
Yeah, for sure.
And so it's a voluntary thing, and people want that. When people go to a eating disorder treatment program, there's a similar vibe often of, we're not here to just be all touchy-feely. We're here to actually stop this behavior. Yeah. You're going to recover, and if you're going to do that, we have some ground rules. Right. But I feel like the clinicians need to admit to themselves that they are adopting that point of view.
Yeah.
And say to themselves, there's pros and cons to this, right? It can come across as judgmental at times and hurtful and alienating to someone, and it's a model that seems to work, and without it, then it doesn't seem to work as well. To get to the drug and alcohol thing, which I'm much more familiar with. For example, the example that I gave of the client telling me that she had used didn't actually happen. But the real thing that happened was she had a dirty urinalysis test, and it came up positive for opiates. Yeah. But it was like barely, and it wasn't a lot. And occasionally these tests are wrong. They'll
false
positives. Yeah. And they confronted her about it, and she was very convincingly saying that she did not use. And a lot of the drug and alcohol folks believed her, but some didn't. And I didn't really know or care because it wasn't really my area, but I did kind of believe her. And I, it was a topic of our individual therapy. She'd be like, I can't believe they don't believe me. I didn't do it. I understand. And it had been months that she hadn't used. So it wasn't like she had just recovered, right? She had seemingly had many months of not using, and there wasn't really any reason for her to have relapsed. So it didn't really make any sense. Well, long story short, it comes out later that she absolutely had relapsed, not only with that, but with a whole other set of behaviors. But before I found that out, there were drug and alcohol folks that were my colleagues who were very, I don't know no other word, but judgmental that she had used and that she was lying about it. And when we would consult about the client, we just had a very different philosophy about how to help this person.
Well, I don't want to presume, though, that because you had that experience of them being judgmental, that your thesis that DBT people are judgmental because they have an agenda is accurate. Bad DBT therapists can be.
But well, my thesis is that it's at least in that larger camp that is very different from the way that I operate constantly. And it was helpful though, because, and I'm not saying that this colleague of mine was a dick about it. She was just very good. She was a drug and alcohol person, and people loved her, and she was to the point, and she was strong, and sometimes there were conflicts between her and the clients, but ultimately they would come around if they were truly on the road to recovery. Whereas for me, someone could continue to engage in the addiction or the target behavior, and I would, I guess, quote unquote, be loose and quote unquote let it go. One could argue enable it, because I might buy into a philosophy of supporting the foundation of the behavior instead of actually confronting it head on.
I understand what you're saying.
So, but I know the pros and the cons to that side of things. The pros are that clients feel free to talk with you about things. The con is that with particular things, maybe I'm not particularly helpful in that way. Anyway, so might the drug and alcohol person have a lot of false positives herself, because she was suspicious of everybody. Everyone was lying, and I mean, not really, but she was very quick to be like, oh, she's using.
Man.
Oh, she and there's no way that she had that ability to see those things automatically. So I'm guessing that there were times when she was overly, quick to jump to that conclusion. But what it did help is that it accelerated this client's process of recovery, because if they were all even just in my direction, then we would have all believed her that she just had a false positive on her UA, and she would have gone further into the addiction, and there would have been consequences to that. And she doesn't want that. The client, a good part of her was actually wanting to recover. So in the end, I don't know if this happened, but I wouldn't be surprised if she thanked this other drug and alcohol counselor for not believing her bullshit. And, I'm sure the client didn't hate me, but probably was thinking, well, he's good for some things, but not for others, And so I think in the DBT world, I don't know. I'm guessing it's not that far, obviously, because that's not really what you're focusing on, right? You're in the DBT world, you're focusing on a much more familiar camp for me of emotional regulation and compassion and listening to people and understanding. But it seems, just my observation from the outside, that there's a theme of that drug and alcohol, I don't know what to call it, but there's a directive streak within DBT.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That was revealed by the word tacky.
So this one's really important. My use of a word should not be an indicator.
Or Marsha Linehan's use of the word, I guess.
Her use of the word should not be an indicator of an attitude of judgment. It's not. A good DBT therapist doesn't hold any judgment. When you have a therapy where you have where somebody's going to subscribe, if they want to do the therapy, they're subscribing to the structure of the thing, and theirs is suicidal and non-suicidal self-injury, they have to go, because they're going to lead to premature death, and that's our stance. And so when you sign on with us, that's what you sign on for. As soon as you have a priority or an agenda, you have to let it go at the same time. Because there will be people...
You meaning the counselor?
Yeah. Because there will be people who cannot be helped. We don't have a therapy that helps everybody. That's just, just think about it for a sec. We don't have medical treatment that helps everybody. We don't have psychotherapy that helps everybody. But the minute you put in a structure, you set yourself up for this kind of sense of frustration and futility and potential for judgment, depending on how a therapist processes their own countertransference.
Meaning that you should be expected at some point to terminate with clients on the basis that this model isn't going to help them.
Well, yeah, I'm saying it poorly. No, what I think a good therapist is going to have to be able to tolerate frustration, because you won't be able to shift everybody's behavior. So you might lose somebody to suicide. Mm-hmm. And doesn't mean that what you're doing is garbage, or it doesn't mean that the client failed. In fact, in DBT, they talk about this very specifically. Pardon me. They say clients cannot fail in therapy. It's impossible. What can fail is therapy, meaning we don't have a therapy that helps everybody, or therapists, meaning the therapist didn't apply the principles and protocols of the therapy in order to help the client. But the client cannot fail. It's sort of like when you go to the surgeon because you have appendicitis and they take your appendix out and you die on the table. That ain't your fault. You have this problem, you showed up, and either the surgeon failed because, they nicked an artery, or maybe we don't have a surgery that helps everybody because everybody's anatomy is a little bit different. Maybe we haven't captured how to do appendectomy for, this particular kind of anatomy. I don't know how that works, but nobody says, oh, well, yeah, the patient failed because they died. Mm. So same with therapy. So in Aikido is fascinating. You ever, it doesn't matter. Aikido has no offensive moves, and they have this saying. They say, whoever grabs loses. So the minute I reach out and grab your arm, I have now attached myself to a particular agenda. You haven't grabbed me. You're going to win this one because I am giving you my energy, and all you have to do is dance with it. And you dance with it properly, I'll be on the floor in just a couple of seconds. So it's the one who grabs. So if a therapist grabs, they're going to lose. So you got to hold loosely. Mm-hmm. You got to hold. I mean, if this is what you believe, well, we've got to get NSSI off the table because it leads to premature death. Fine. And you won't get it off the table in the time frame that you want for all people, or for some, you won't get it off at all. And that has to be okay. So nobody can get kicked out of there's only one way out of a DBT skills class. They have a specific rule about this, and that's if you miss coming 4 times in a row. That's it. You do self-harm in the class, no, not a grounds for getting kicked out.
Yeah, the student who had done the target behavior in the middle of the class was not kicked out of class.
Oh, hell no. No, she's mostly a most welcome person in the class. If you miss 4 in a row, that's it. If you quit, you're not out unless you miss 4 in a row. So I've had people quit and then show up 2 weeks later and okay, welcome back. That's it. But you can't get kicked out for doing a target behavior ever. Mm. You just can't, because that would just be being a dick. Mm-hmm. You kick somebody out because they had the behavior that they showed up in therapy to try to get a hold of. That's just crazy. Mm-hmm.
And it's a belief in the individual that they can recover from the behavior. Yeah. It's a, hey,
right.
I know you can do it, and so let's do this, and we'll give you the tools. Yeah. And the expectation is that there's going to be abstinence from that behavior. Well, it's been a little long, but let's take a break here. We get back. Let's continue the conversation. What do you say?
Yes.
Okay, we're back from the break.
Right.
Another field that I worked in that it had this element was in domestic violence treatment. The perpetrators, it wasn't, I don't know if we had it explicitly stated, but it was obvious that if they were violent with their spouse, then we were not going to just let that go, for example.
Right. Yeah.
And we had a very pointed, I would argue even judgmental in that instance, directive that violence and control and abuse of anyone, particularly their spouse, because that was usually what landed them in the group to begin with, was off the table, and they were not going to do that. I don't think they would have been kicked out of the group, but we would have absolutely carved out time to talk about it if it happened. Yeah. We would have been very pointed to, if they justified it or said,
right.
I didn't start it or something.
Yeah,
we would say, that doesn't fly with us. Or if they said, I don't want to talk about it, we'd say, fuck you, we're going to talk about it. The other group members would join in because the more advanced participants had recovered sufficiently personality-wise such that they were on the other side of the Rubicon and could speak more plainly to the other participants.
Right.
And it's for the good of the client themselves. Of course, it's good for the people around them.
Right.
And I get that.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to be recognized, and it was recognized to me at the time, that it's a choice. It's not necessarily, and it doesn't naturally emerge from the work. It's a decision that you're making clinically that you believe to be the right move for that person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying is that I hadn't realized that about the DBT thing. Like when we brought that up in the last episode, I thought you would be, and DBT in general, because I think of DBT as a therapy technique, but and it is, but it has this element of directiveness, I suppose.
For sure.
That I just didn't know that it was there. I didn't, especially I didn't know that you would actually do anything like that. But I absolutely understand the utility of it, and
sure.
Overall, 99% of the time, I'm sure that it's extremely helpful And to have, for example, my general attitude about cutting would be terrible in a group like that. Just be like, well, whatever. It would not be helpful to the group.
I can't imagine you being glibly dismissive about such a thing.
No, but if, say, a client came in and said that they had cut the night before, and they just said it flippantly or even in a glorified way, and I said, well, do you want to talk about that? And they said, no, I'm good. It would just go right past me. I'd be like, okay, well, what does the group want to talk about? Like if I were running a support group and it wasn't DBT, that's what I would do.
Right.
And you could argue that isn't ultimately helpful.
This was really good feedback for me, because I've had that word in my lexicon for years, just because, I'm a great mimic. I just mimic what I've heard. So the feedback that word it has a judgy edge to it is like, it's not something I would have recognized, but I'm glad to have gotten the feedback. I'm a little embarrassed by it.
Why?
Well, one does not wish to be, this is a bit strong
dickish.
word. Yeah, dickish. Yeah.
Well, that's why when you said it, I thought, well, that doesn't fit with what that word means to me.
Yeah.
And I think to some of the listeners, what does not fit with the way I see you. And so that's when I said, well, but, and then you clarified it from that point.
Yeah.
But
maybe not sufficiently.
Yeah. But it is a good discussion. And I think for clinicians out there, it's important to understand, because I'll just say this one last asterisk, is that people will sometimes talk about motivational interviewing and solution-focused therapy and think of them as the same, and they do look very similar, but they're fundamentally completely at opposite ends of the spectrum. And it's sort of in this camp, and I totally value motivational interview. So just to give a short primer on it, is with motivational interviewing is maybe a little easier to describe. Essentially, it emerged out of drug and alcohol treatment. And instead of, if someone sits down and in terms of stage of change, they're pre-contemplative, meaning that they haven't identified fully or even halfway that they have a problem with alcohol, for example.
Yeah.
But quote unquote, as the clinician, that the person is drinking every day throughout the day. It absolutely is a problem for them. And you can see all the consequences of their chronic drinking. They've lost their job, their relationships, their health is falling apart, their sleep is bad, And so, in quotes, that the client is in denial and that what would be best for the client is if they stop drinking. But you can't just yell at them and say, stop drinking. That isn't helpful. It's more helpful to lead them down a road where they can make that choice themselves and can realize it themselves. So they call this thing motivational interviewing, where you interview in a way that will promote motivation. And you will say, okay, well, and they teach you how not to be judgmental or to push back. You accept with an asterisk. And you will say, okay, so how was your drinking? Well, yeah, I drank all day yesterday. Okay, how do you feel about it? And the client says, I feel fine about it. And as the clinician, you say, okay, so you feel fine about it. Everything's good. Everything's good. Okay, well, let me ask you some questions. And totally up to you. You're very, very tentative, but you know where you're headed as a clinician. For sure. So you ask the client, well, so how are things going in your life? Let's not even talk about alcohol. Like, how are things? And then eventually you get the client, they will say, well, yeah, my life is kind of falling apart. And as a clinician, you say, okay, well, what do you think the factors are in that? And in the back of your mind, you know what the main factor is that they're drinking, but you ask it in a way that's very curious and it doesn't have anything that you're assuming. You're coming across like you're not assuming. And so the client feels free to explore without judgment. Yeah. Because the idea is that if a client is given the space, they will lead themselves to that because it's logical, it's obvious. Yeah. They know, of everyone on the planet knows that their alcohol is a problem, but they maybe have never had a non-judgmental, non-shaming space to actually have the freedom to fully go there and to discover that for themselves. So that's the idea with motivational interviewing. With solution-focused, it can look like that, but the major difference is that with solution-focused therapy, the therapist has no idea where the client will end up and has no agenda. With the motivational interviewing folks, they absolutely know, quote unquote, where the client should end up. And they know exactly what the client should be motivated to eventually realize and take action on. The solution-focused person, it is fundamental to that form of therapy that they drill it into their head and divorce themselves from any notion that they know what's best. For example, with a solution-focused person, it's not likely, but they could work with an alcoholic, and that person could eventually come to the conclusion that alcohol is not the factor that is in the way of them changing their life. And in fact, it's their job or something else or their relationships. And so the client learns that they need to, or think differently or something like that. And the solution-focused person, not only on the surface, but deep down, they have conditioned themselves to believe that or to go with where the client is. Because the belief is that if you do that, the client will eventually gravitate towards what is best for them.
So it's a belief in the innate capacity of a human to find their pathway to well-being and welfare.
Yeah.
It's an innate belief. Like that's Rogers has a similar attitude.
Exactly. And an innate belief that you know nothing about what a client should or should not do. To believe that is hubris and counter to therapy, counter to help. So you really have to demote yourself in that assumption, and it's hard for any human to do, particularly therapists.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So solution focus is a very different philosophy, and I've played in that space a lot, and it's very freeing.
Yeah.
It really liberates. I liberated myself. Narrative therapies like all the quote unquote postmodern therapies, collaborative therapies are in this camp, and it's a wonderful place to be. For some of you who watch my reality TV reaction videos, you might have complimented me or something that's like, wow, you really just don't judge people, and a lot of it actually comes from that. It's not people will label me as being wholesome, as if I'm nice.
Oh.
I don't think I'm particularly nice. I just have a philosophy that I have been demoting myself and realizing for myself that it's actually, and there's many instances, points of learning, right? Because when you're a therapist, there's a lot of opportunity to start inserting yourself and start saying, well, I think you should do this.
Sure.
And when you have 30 years of practice, it's almost like mindfulness, where you just get good at the mental process over time, where it's like and I know what it feels like when I have that emerging thought of like, well, they're in a marriage that looks like it should break up, and I've had thousands of instances of being able to learn what that impulse feels like internally, and to have effective ways of philosophically within half a second negating it, not just pushing it back, but literally just eliminating it from being a possible thought that I was like, that's stupid. Like, and all these memories come into to focus in that half a second that are memories of me being wrong about stuff like that. It's like, remember, you've been wrong, and you've stored those away. So in this moment, you might not be wrong, but there's no way to know if you're right. And there's a lot of reasons to believe that you're wrong. And it does no good to focus on that thought. It doesn't even help the client, even if you are right, to believe you're right and to tell them they're wrong, or to have that vibe in your questions is definitely not going to help them, So with solution focus and motivational interviewing can look similar but be very different.
Sure.
And the problem that I have, and this is where I was headed, was motivational interviewing people will think they are, I've heard this before, they will say they are like solution focused, and they're not. When you talk to solution focused people, when they look at motivational interviewing people, they're like, you're not like us. You're fine, do your thing, but do not think that you are like us. You are fundamentally different from us because of the reasons I laid out. And that lack of self-awareness is the problem, that as a clinician, you have to understand where you are. And instead of just believing that you're right or that you are in the philosophically sound area, you just have to know you're in an area. And you have to be able to reflect on that and know the pros and the cons. Like for me, I could have a story that being non-judgmental is the right way to be, but I understand that might not always be the right thing given what I'm saying. And the word non-judgment is a catch-all, but non-directive, or not having it within my set of beliefs that a particular behavior needs to change or something like that. And so to not reflect on that And to not understand that you're making a choice to believe a certain thing based on the pros and the cons, I believe to be, can present some problems, because it can produce for the clinician this notion that they have a natural belief as opposed to a chosen belief for a reason. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for the DBT folks, I would hope, or the drug and alcohol folks, or for folks like me, the Rogerian, I don't know what you call me, but whatever you call me, for the every theory, every profession, every place comes with it a certain set of philosophies, and you know, there are pros and cons, and that's great, and it should be utilized in that way. But because I worry that people who don't know how to, younger or more novice people that don't know how to navigate this, will be brainwashed into that area as the best area, as opposed to just an area.
I remember when I read Linehan's book on it's called Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Borderline Personality Disorder, but it's DBT, right? I had this overlay that I could not see back then. When I would read, I would distort what I was reading to kind of match something in my worldview that had really way too much to do with my relationship with my father and my sense about doing the right thing, like Catholic rules, you know, whatever.
Meaning that when you were reading it, it felt mean or something?
It almost seemed like a license to be mean.
Mm.
So there's one passage in there that has to do with it's in a client's interest for a therapist to want to work with them. You could really distort that.
Well, say it again.
It's in a client's interest for the therapist to want to work with them.
Uh-huh.
It's, you know...
Meaning that, right. I think I see what you're saying, that it is a way of justifying when a client is pushing back, that regardless of what I'm doing to you, you need to appreciate what I'm doing to you.
Yeah, which is, you know, that was a big distortion that took me a long time to kind of even just see that I had it. Because in the most literal sense, it is true. In the most basic sense...
Depending on the therapist, though.
What do you mean?
Well, it's not within the interest of every client to give in to the therapist's treatment model.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that the actual sentence is a client's going to get better therapy if the therapist wants to work with them than if the therapist doesn't.
Oh, I see.
But this is not meant to be a bludgeon.
Right.
It's just a basically true statement.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to distort.
Yeah.
It's very easy to
Yeah. Well, what does she mean by that statement?
I think she means that basically clients are going to get better outcomes if therapists want to do that kind of want to work with them.
Right.
And if clients behave in a way that burns
it's more
up.
of a message to therapists, like you need to try to have a positive attitude about your work.
Well, no, that's not, at least as I remember it, that's not how she wrote it. Though she would say it's in your interest to love your clients.
Yeah.
Like she's a pretty warm person.
Yeah.
To her peeps, to her clients. But if like, let's say, this was back in the days of pagers. If every time my pager goes off, I'm having a freak out because, oh shit, this might be another suicidal crisis. And, that's going to affect, how I interact with the person, whether maybe they just want to tell me, hey, it's my kid's birthday.
Yeah.
Who knows? I mean, whatever. But if my body goes into fight or flight when I'm interacting with my client, and that makes me kind of like brittle and not want to be there, my client's not going to get as good therapy. Now, it's not my client's job to manage me.
Yeah.
That's mine.
Right.
Yeah. And, that's a thing that probably we're always, honing our, managing our own feelings. Or I should just speak for myself. I'm always honing. So, oh boy. Actually, let me think about this for a sec. I noticed that I don't want to talk about it any further because I will say it in such a way that will be interpreted as clients have to accommodate therapists, and I don't mean that. So I probably can't talk about it well.
But your intention was to say what exactly?
That it's actually clients get better outcomes if therapists like working with them.
Yeah, right. So you're saying that when you were reading the book, that it can come across in a way that isn't representative of what the work is actually like, or even what Marshall Linehan is really like. And then if you actually go through
that's what I'm saying, the
whole thing, then you see like, well, there's language in there that you could interpret it, but when you actually know what she's referring to and the culture of it all, it's not mean, it's not judgmental.
That was the biggest benefit I got from working for her, is a relearning of what the heck she's trying to do. Because what she's trying to do and what I told myself she was trying to do when I read that book, they're not very close. So, and I just attribute that to either, maybe she's not the best of writers. That was a hard book to get through. But also I have, bad breath, hard to smell your own. So I got a chance to smell mine.
I feel like I'm the first person that smells my own bad breath.
Yeah.
Don't you smell your bad breath?
No, man. When I was, I was about 31, 32, went to work. David Kersey, my good friend.
Oh, no.
Comes into my office and he's like, you remember the other day when you said friends tell friends tough stuff? Like, because I think I told him he had a booger or something. And he said, oh, thanks for telling me. I'm like, well, friends tell. He's like, you often have very bad breath.
Often?
Yeah.
Yeesh.
Now, I have lots of dental work.
Very bad breath.
Oh, yeah, he was not kidding. And
I've never known you to have bad breath.
Yeah. So I didn't know. And I have a lot of dental work that, like lends itself to that as a possibility. So occasionally Colleen will be like, could you brush and floss? And I may have just brushed and flossed that morning, and it's 5 PM and things have fermented a bit in my face. So I'll just go brush and floss because I know this. And unless I take a med that gives me a bit of dry mouth. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's fine. I mean, I get it, and I was really glad to get the advice that was mortifying to be told.
Yeah. But thank God someone said so.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would sit in a very small room and sometimes have 2 people, like a client and an interpreter, because I worked with a lot of foreign language, non-English speaking folk. And I don't know how I put them both through it. But one time I remember the interpreter, she's lovely, Maria, never forget her. She was a model. She's on the cover of Time magazine. Like, if you look up Time magazine, they did an article on migraine. That's her face on the cover. She looks in a lot of distress.
Did she actually suffer from migraine? She's just a model.
She's just a model that they used for, yeah.
That's funny.
But lovely. Anyways, she would be like, Bob, you want a mint? And I'd say, oh, no, thanks.
You said no thanks?
I didn't know I had bad breath at the time. And then later I'm like, she wasn't asking me if I wanted a mint.
But that's classic. Never turn down a mint. That's what they're saying.
One time I offered a mint to a client because I was having one. And she's like, do I have bad breath? And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure it's me. So anyways, how did we get on this? Oh, bad breath. It's hard to smell your own. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I was really glad to find out. Because, who wants to come near that?
Yeah. So, kind of in theme, I don't think you actually meant it this way. I don't think, or maybe you did, was that when you are indoctrinated into a philosophy of therapy and a treatment model, that it's hard to see the woods for the trees because you're in the woods or whatever, right? And when an outsider actually goes, well, that's an interesting word. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
It gives one an opportunity to reflect on the foundation, not a bad one, but it's an area that you're in, right?
Yeah.
And 2, that what I've seen, and I'm not saying it about you, and I don't even know if I know anyone from DBT that's like this, but I have seen people within solution-focused folks, I've seen people within motivational interviewing folks, within drug and alcohol groups, that when you're outside pointing out the bad breath, or just the breath, it's not even say it's bad, and you're saying focused, and you're saying you're in an area, you're in an area, and there are other areas that are valid and have their own pros and cons,
right?
And you get pushback from those individuals saying that you're wrong, no other area is valid.
Yeah, right.
Then you're talking about a cult member. But I mean, to be frank, you're talking about a brainwashed person who either is insecure or they've been brainwashed by other insecure folks. And if you can't reflect and criticize your own model and see it, then you're lost. You're lost. Truly. So the fact that you can do that is healthy.
A good rule of thumb for me is if it doesn't have compassion and humility embedded in it, it's probably missing something important.
Yeah. All right, let's take a break. We get back, more questions. What do you say?
Yep.
Okay, Bob, we're back from the break. Anonymous from Ireland. She says, "Hi, Kirk and Bob. I'm a big fan. I'm a fairly new clinician. I'm finding that I tend to be more anxious before sessions with clients that I have a good relationship with. It's like I'm afraid I will mess things up. Please, can you share your thoughts?"
So I want to punt on this one and give myself a chance. Can you just say your thoughts and I'll chime in when I have some?
Okay. Well, yeah. So you're saying, Anonymous from Ireland, that when you think of all your clients, you get the most anxious with clients that you have the best relationship with, people that you feel comfortable with, or people that you have a deeper relationship with. And I don't know, but yeah, it sounds like for these folks, you understand the weight of the matter. You actually, well, I don't know. I guess you'd really have to think about what it is that is causing the fear. Is it that you are now in a place where you actually can help and you don't feel like you know what you're doing? Maybe with these other folks, the people you don't have a good relationship with. I'll give an example. For me, when I was a wrestler, I was not good at the first step of wrestling, which was the takedown. But I was good at everything else. I was good at reversals. I was good at pinning people. I was good at squirming my way out of things. I was good at escapes, but I was not good at takedowns. And when we had a tournament where I went up against my nemesis in the league, he was the one guy that was difficult for me. And it was really embarrassing because it was the one time when a bunch of people came to the match. Usually people didn't come to wrestling matches, but this one was like, I think on like a Friday night, and like almost everyone in the school showed up.
Wow.
And I went up against my nemesis and I lost to him because he was very good at takedowns, but he wasn't good at the rest. So it was sort of like this opportunity for me to shine athletic prowess, but because the whole tournament was organized around his skills, I lost miserably. At the end of the season, I ended up beating him in the championship. It was hard, but the point is that for you might be like my nemesis. You're good at the beginning, but then once you get the good relationship, you don't feel as confident or something like that. And so maybe you have a general insecurity, but there's one thing you know what to do, which is actually to develop a close relationship, to be able to listen or something. Another possibility is that the bad, quote unquote, bad relationship or the neutral relationship clients, they are not in therapy because they want to be necessarily, or you just kind of feel like, well, they're kind of phoning it in, so I don't really need to worry. It's not really my fault or something like that. Anyway.
I had that thought too. Like maybe what happens is we fragilize the good relationship. We treat it like, it's going to go to heck. And the relationship that, is the neutral or the bad one, we're not afraid of, it's sort of like, I ain't got nothing to lose here. I'm going to leave it all on the mat, so to speak, and show up with my full self. But maybe one gets stuck in being worried about maintaining and loses focus on whatever good therapy happens to be, or in favor of what's to maintain the good relationship.
Yeah. So it's also just possible that you're still learning and you're recognizing what's at stake, and who knows, but I'm guessing if someone were to work with you, and obviously talk with your supervisor and mentor about this, but the likelihood is pretty high that the best thing you can do is to return to fundamentals of listening and of caring for your clients and having compassion and creating a space for them to explore. And you might be overthinking it. A lot of novice therapists do. There's this notion that somehow, the word I would always use was tinkering. I'd be like, stop trying to tinker. There's nothing to tinker, and there's no method of tinkering. I think people think of therapy as to use a metaphor, it's like they're opening up, like Siler did in Heroes, the TV show, where he'd open up someone's skull and he would figure out the brain, and then he would adopt things. And so there's this notion of like, okay, I'm gonna use this one sentence, or I'm gonna create this one intervention, and then that'll turn everything around. And there's some mild truth to that, but to focus on that as a therapist is misguided and a setup for failure and anxiety. So I would say, stop tinkering and start listening. Stop tinkering, stop listening. Annual patron Moira, she says, I want to be a therapist. I'm completing my undergrad at the moment. I'm currently in therapy. My biggest problem at the moment is having disorganized attachment. I worry that it skews my perspective and that I won't be able to provide the help I want because of my own baggage. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, great place to start. It will at times skew your perspective, because that's just the nature of the thing. So the good thing you got going for you is you got awareness that does indeed happen. It will happen. So keep at it. It's going to follow you into graduate school and then into your clinical work. And your job isn't to try to prevent that. Your job is to learn from it each time it does, have some humility, and talk to your supervisor, your mentor, whoever is in your corner, so that you can, that's like that autobiography in 5 Short Chapters by Portia Nelson. Do you know this poem? I won't be able to remember it, all of it, but basically it's chapter 1. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm there. It takes a long time to get out. Chapter 2, I walk down the sidewalk. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm here again. It's not my fault. It takes forever to get out. Chapter 3 is I walk down the sidewalk. There's a deep hole. I fall in. I know this place. It's my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. Oh, no, that's chapter 3. Chapter 4 is what I just said. And then chapter 5 is... no. Chapter 4 is I walk down the sidewalk. There's a deep hole. I walk around it. And chapter 5 is I walk down a different sidewalk, where there will be another deep hole, and that we will fall in, because that's just the nature of learning. The things I struggle with now aren't the things I struggled with 5 years ago or 15 years ago or 25 years ago. And the things that I struggle with 10 years from now won't be the same as the things that are here now. And that's one of the great things about being a therapist, is this perpetual opportunity to grow. It's really quite lovely and profound thing I'm quite privileged to have that as my profession. So it's going to happen, Moira. That's okay. Mm-hmm. You just keep learning, and you'll be all right.
When you say you're not struggling with the same things today as you were before, what do you mean by that?
Well, in the old days, I would say that I was not clear about some things that I'm really glad to know about now. Like, I didn't understand compassion, and I didn't understand its utility. And so there was I have an edge. I can have an edge. There was an edge in my work back then that wouldn't be now. And then later, I didn't understand attachment, and actually had opportunity to learn about that, but didn't understand that learning about that was absolutely fundamental. And so didn't. And then I did, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to change. That changes a lot about how I work. And am I answering your question?
I forget.
Oh shit.
Well, I also wonder, I think what I was wondering about is, when you refer to things that you struggle with, are you saying things in clinical work or things in your personal life?
Oh, I was thinking about clinical work, though there clearly are personal things too.
Oh, okay. So clinically, in the past, you would struggle with compassion, whereas today you don't.
Not so much.
Yeah. And yeah. I mean, disorganized attachment, any sort of issue, there's two things at play often when people ask these questions. One is that there's a stigma or some kind of expectation that therapists are perfect or something like this. And then you'll also have the opposite belief that all therapists are screwed up or something. And it's just like, therapists, and what do we mean by a spectrum of being screwed up exactly.
Right.
It doesn't really hold water to think about life like that, because, for example, for you, on a one scale, in terms of attachment and abuse syndromes within your personality, you're at the high end, but you're also one of the most healthy, self-aware, compassionate people on the planet. So which one is it? Are you, in terms of when they say, well, all therapists are crazy, are you one of the crazy people or are you one of the non-crazy people? So it's nonsensical. The way that I look at it is that I rather recently, I think I've said this on the podcast when I figured it out, I rather recently figured out that no one is not on a personality disorder spectrum.
Right.
No one is not prone to insecure attachment feelings and behaviors. There's no, it took me a long time to kind of figure that out. And I think about a few years ago, I just did a mental inventory of everyone that I know. Because, client-wise, that's one population, right?
Right?
But if I were to think about everyone in my life, every coworker, every family member, every friend, I just, over time, especially if I have enough time with people, I just passively note, oh, that's a trauma for that person, or oh, that's a schema, or oh, that's a personality disorder trait right there.
Right.
I don't. People say, oh, I'm analyzing everyone. It's like, well, that's not really how I look at it. It's just noticing the humanity of, and sometimes it's explicitly discussed.
Yeah.
It's like, quote unquote, I've diagnosed you with disorganized attachment. No, we've just had conversations that have led us in that natural direction, right? So,
well, people that study birds can look at a bird and know what bird it is.
Right.
They're not analyzing the bird. They just
They just
birds.
note it. Yeah. It's just something you notice, because why would you not? Plus, it's a big part of getting to know someone. It's a way that I will experience people. Of course, I'm not thinking about it consciously usually, but anyway.
No, you're conversant and fluent in therapy.
We're going back. And so with everyone that I know, I'm like, wow, I can't think of really anyone who is that sort of person that I thought existed in the past, which was always sure of themselves, never overreactive, just this light as a feather walking through life, and everything is happy-go-lucky. When you talk to the gurus that are actually good, like people like the Dalai Lama, these folks, when you present this attitude to them, because a lot of people think of them like that, and they will dispel it. Often it doesn't go over well with the population because they don't really hear it. They don't want to believe it. But they'll say, I'm not any better than you. I'm just as prone to anger and to sadness and to attachments and to being upset about things. I overreact. There's a bad part of my personality. I just engage in a practice that is, I believe, helpful to me and others around me. When I speak from that place of a lot of time thinking and talking about this sort of thing. But I'm not any healthier than you. If you knew me, you would know that I just, I have bad moods, and they'll have all these stories. And I feel like a lot of people, they're just like, oh, he's just being graceful. He's just being gracious. He's gracious. He's being gracist. And
he's such a gracist.
And but the more older I get, the more I believe them.
Yeah.
I think, they're probably massive dicks.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Oh yeah.
And they have rigid beliefs that are unattractive and not in line with what we think of them to be, these elevated, holy, above it all kind of people. That no one like that exists. And so thus, when you have a self-awareness around disorganized attachment, Moira, you're not separate from the rest. You are You are just aware of how common you are. You know what I mean? It's your thing. Disorganized attachment is your thing, but for someone else, they have a different thing. Now, some things can present perhaps more reactivity and more distortions, sure, but it's not unusual. It's not strange. The other thing that I think people are operating from is that somehow when you have issues like this, it will, it's tempting before you become a therapist to look at your close relationships with your partners or your friends as the way a therapeutic relationship will feel like, right? But a therapeutic relationship can be very deep and can be very compassionate. It can be very involved. There are clients that I've worked with for many years who I know very, very well. And sometimes I'm like, how come I can't have conversations like this with my friends or something, or my family members?
Right.
It's deep, but it's different. And my personality is not really called upon. It's not really involved as much as when I'm here talking to you, Bob.
Right.
I am there to provide a service. I'm there as a professional. It's a deep relationship, but I'm not. There's a mode that I think practiced therapists will go into where your own insecurities aren't triggered as often and your own issues aren't at play as often. The amount of times in a regular relationship with a friend or a family member or my wife where my more unfortunate qualities of my personality will emerge is pretty much constant. But with my clients, it's actually kind of rare.
Yeah.
So, because you keep your eye on the ball when you're a therapist. You listen. You're in their world. You're trying to help them. A lot of therapy is the client talking, so you are free to sit back and relax and observe and care. There's not a lot of responsibility for you as a therapist to somehow fill the room with your own personality. So it's not uncommon, for example, to have a really hard time with close relationships, but not have a hard time with close clients. And I've seen that before.
Yeah.
In fact, for some, well, you tell me, Bob, is there solace in that for you where you will go through a tough couple weeks with close relationships, but then with your clients feel like, this feels like a reprieve from the difficulties of my actual in-person relationships with people?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, it's often the case. I'm in my marriage, the edges of my insecurity are, I went constant, it's a bit dramatic, but frequent. And it's, as you say, rare in my professional life, not unheard of, but rare. And that is those experiences I have. I mean, I probably have 20 to 25 clinical hours a week. That's a big chunk of my attention and time. And most of the time that's going pretty well. And so it's a great comfort and solace to me that that's the case. And when things in my personal life are bumpier, yeah, for sure. It's not a substitute. It's just, like there are other people, like I'm thinking of somebody I know who's an accountant, and when they go to work, it's a nice distraction from the problems in their life. They're just immersed in whatever it is. And then, they finish their day and they return home, and whatever's there, awaits, and whatever edges that has to do that come up for them come up. And it's nice to have a break from it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Does your disorganized attachment get triggered with your clients?
Yeah.
Is it very often?
It was more often before. And is it very often? I'd say it's every 1 to 2 months.
Okay.
Something will get triggered in me. It's milder than it used to be, but it's definitely significant, and it's there.
Yeah, and in the past, correct me if I'm wrong, when it was triggered, the common response from you internally was judgment and anger at a client.
Oh, for sure.
And then it would sort of shine through in your intervention.
Without question, it couldn't not.
And then maybe even become a rupture that you have to repair with a client. And when you first started out, was that true as well?
When I first started out as a therapist?
Yeah, the first 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, more frequent. And one of the things that's also true is I worked in a place that was highly stressful, and I was had colleagues who dedicated, but also prone to burnout.
Burnt out, and talking shit about their clients.
Yeah, and then you get the attitude about what is, and that's why I'm glad that when I left, I'm glad I did leave, because I found other colleagues who didn't have that kind of attitude, and I'm prone and vulnerable to, well, probably no more maybe a little more than other people, to absorbing my environment and absorbing the attitudes of those around me. Huh. So if I hadn't met people that practice in the way that I believe we ought to practice, I don't think I would have developed much.
Yeah. And what would have helped you back then?
What did help me was supervision and mentorship. David Taylor saved my ass.
Yeah. Someone that could model for you how to have compassion and not engage in the toxic work environment against clients, us versus them.
Yeah, and folks who believed in me and supported me and guided me. I don't think he ever judged me, but I don't think he was no shrinking violet either. He wasn't gonna, he gave me feedback. He helped me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for you, Moira, having someone or a group of people like that, well, for anyone would help, but particularly around things like that. And, maybe for you, Moira, the vulnerability would be similar. And all therapists are vulnerable to this, but if you have disorganized attachments, good chance you were abused growing up and have some triggers there around that.
Right.
Certain attitudes or statements or vibes from a client that might remind you of your abusive parent. And the way you navigate that is, the way you navigate it. There's every mistake we make as a therapist is a potential opportunity for an apology and therapy for the client.
Yeah.
And frankly, I guess as a side effect, therapy for ourselves to have the compassion, the self-compassion, the humility, the self-awareness to say, well, that was triggered and that's not my fault that it was triggered. And it's really hard to rein that in for anyone. And I'm going to absorb this and accept it and take responsibility and apologize while still retaining the foundation that I'm a good person and people make mistakes, and then to apologize. So
do you think that's why people have such a hard time with apology, is if they say they're sorry, it means that they're a bad person?
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah, it does. It's a big part of this awareness for me is watching reality TV and also analyzing people's apologies, is that the more insecure you are, and I guess myself as well, when I am insecure about who I am, I'm the most rigid internally in my brain that I was right.
Right.
And when I learned this in part a long time ago watching my parents, actually, because when I noticed, so there were 6 people in my family, so in a small house, so there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of things happening. You grew up in a similar house.
I did.
And you just can't not have moments with everyone for various purposes and reasons. And did you live on the smaller end of a house?
Yeah, I shared a room with my 2 brothers.
Your whole childhood?
Oh, yeah.
My God, that is...
Actually, and then we had a foster kid, so it was 4 of us in that room.
So...
It was a pretty small room. It was like a third of the size of this room.
So you shared a room with your 2 brothers the entire time of your childhood?
2 bunk beds and a single.
And even you're 17 years old, you're sharing a room with your younger brother?
Yeah. My whole growing up life, Danny and I
did not know that.
Yeah. We slept together for... middle
that sucks, man, to not have your own room.
I never did have my own room till I was in college and I was an RA. That was the first time I had my own room.
Golly, you did live in a small house. Our house is pretty small too, but not that small.
Did you have your own room?
Yeah, I had my own room. So the house had 4 bedrooms plus like another room that they converted into a bedroom. So yeah, you could say like there were 5 bedrooms. So my parents and then the 4 of us each had our own room. Yeah.
3-bedroom house, 1 bath. My sister had her own room. Makes sense. My parents and then me and my brothers.
Yeah. We had 3 bathrooms, which is kind of shocking to me when I think about it. I mean, one of the bathrooms was real janky and that was mine. But
janky bathroom.
Yeah. When we were young, I would notice that, for example, when I would ask so there are a lot of moments where people are trying to find things. And so I'd be like, Mom, where's the peanut butter or something? Or where's the broom? And she'd be like, well, I think that it's in the garage in this one place. And then I'd look there and it was there. And then when I would be asked a question, people would be like, where's the broom? I'd be like, oh, it's in the garage. Or I'd say like definitively, it's in the garage. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed was that some of the times I was wrong. It wasn't in the garage. But I was so sure of myself.
Oh, yeah.
And I was so definitive.
Right.
There was no tentativeness.
Yeah.
And I noticed that my parents were almost always right, and I was far less often right. So I noticed as a kid that why am I so sure of myself when I say things? Because I had this initial perspective that my parents weren't actually sure.
Oh, uh-huh.
That they were actually extremely unaware of things, or they just didn't, whenever they answered questions, they just like, I'm just taking a wild guess that it's, the way they said it, because I didn't understand gray zone, and I remember really respecting that and thinking, okay, I'm going to turn a new leaf and try to be more like that. Even when I'm pretty sure, I need to recognize I might be wrong. Yeah. And two, it just comes across better to other people when you're more tentative about things, instead of annoyed and sure of yourself. And so, over the years, I've developed, I suppose, a little bit more in that direction of to just be humble about that. So we're talking about that because as a therapist, is that what we're saying? What were we saying?
I think we were talking about being humble as a therapist, but I could be wrong.
Okay. Well, I'll be extremely tentative about why we got to this place. I have no idea where the broom is, and I have no idea how we got to this point.
The peanut butter, that's lost.
It's the end of the episode.
Hey, so wait a minute. Before we ring off, last year, when we were in Italy, we were sitting at the dinner table. It was like the first or second night there. So we were learning people's names. We didn't know anybody. And there were 18, 19 people there, right? So I'm sitting there with this woman, Nancy. She was really cool. And she's like, well, what's her name? And I said, someone said it's Deborah, like Deborah, but with a V. Devra. And I'm like, I think it's Devora. And Nancy looks at me and she goes, are you sure? And I said, yeah. And that might be a problem. Her name is Devra. It was a really cool moment of saying yes and then realizing, I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
So it was nice to say, and that might be a problem.
Well, what you're saying is you have enough self-awareness to know that when you're sure of something, that's a red flag.
Yeah, it's a red flag. It was a good moment. So we had a laugh about it, and then we had a laugh when I was wrong, and that was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that does it for that episode.
Yeah.
And everyone, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.